My name is Emily, and I'm turning 33 this year. Reflecting on my journey so far, the amount of change is astounding. A little over a decade after I graduated from college, I was employed by a respectable business that practically everyone would know. The money was decent, even for a newbie like myself, which was a huge comfort. However, as with anything that seems too good to be true, there was a catch. I was soon traveling for work or training. Eventually, working over half the month and on vacations became commonplace. It was challenging without question. However, the sense of joy I had from my work kept me motivated even on the most difficult days. By the time I turned 27, I had become the head of the department. It was an impressive achievement, especially for a woman in a professional context. My sweetheart, Daniel, and I were married years ago. We had met through a mutual friend, and at the time I wasn't really looking for a date. Because she was concerned about my well-being and thought I might use some motivation, my friend introduced us. Getting married didn't really appeal to me. In fact, I often imagine that I will be a single woman for the rest of my life. But Daniel was different from the beginning. He was open about wanting to be married soon. He said he also wanted children, but it would be harder to raise them as we became older. At that moment, I was not interested in having kids. The concept of marriage felt absurd, especially as we didn't know each other well. I had just received a promotion, so I was focusing on my career. Rather than starting a family, Daniel would continually bring up marriage. With expressions like "you're rushing things," I would politely object. "We need to get to know each other better." To this, a compromise would be Daniel's response. "Okay, let's go on dates for 2 years. By then, we'll know each other well enough, right?" I must admit that I didn't think we would survive for 2 years, but we did. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Throughout our collaboration, Daniel wasn't a gambler. He was faithful, and he was polite to me. He was someone I respected for being a diligent and responsible worker in his field. The one thing that always bothered me, though, was his ego. He would always urge me to do what I thought was best and then rush home after a senior coworker pointed out a mistake he had made. They have a lot of power. I don't need someone to tell me what to do and listen to him. Although it was clear that he was being criticized for his errors, he didn't appear to be able to accept helpful comments. It was disheartening to see how he handled criticism, whether it came from a superior or someone else. When it came time to introduce ourselves to our families, we decided to have dinner together. For some reason, Daniel chose a restaurant that charged over $200 per person. When he suggested that I pay for half of the costs, I was taken aback. This place is just too expensive. Is there nowhere else that makes sense for us to go? I expressed my hope that it would be easier for both of us. "This is important," Daniel said. "Selecting a low-cost location will give the impression that I'm thrifty." I wasn't able to do it. At that moment, "I can't afford 8 people with my wage," he explained, adding, "It struck me how he prioritized appearances over practicality. Maybe I can manage 3, but I need your help with the rest." I was annoyed. There were 8 of us, 4 from each household, and Daniel, who couldn't even afford to feed his own family, was suggesting a luxury restaurant. Despite my discomfort, I remained silent. In order to avoid creating a commotion, I reluctantly consented to paying over half of the cost. In the eatery where we finally crossed paths, "Don't worry about the bill today. I've got it covered," Daniel reassured everyone as I watched. His upbeat demeanor covered up my inner turmoil. In this instance, I chose to let him lead because everyone seemed happy. Still, I couldn't shake the unpleasant feeling when I looked back. I'm sorry I didn't speak out after we were married. I saw a significant difference in Daniel's attitude toward me. Previously kind and supportive, my partner began speaking to me condescendingly. Before we were married, he had promised to assist out around the house. But after the wedding, everything was different. He began saying things like this: "What will the neighbors think if they see a man hanging out the laundry? Household duties are the responsibility of women." His words were like a slap across the face. While I was out working hard and juggling my responsibilities, He expected me to handle all the housework while he relaxed at home. No matter how busy I was, he never offered to help. Was he really thinking that anyone would notice a man doing the laundry? As the months passed, I began to feel more and more trapped. My dreams of a romantic connection were replaced by the realities of my daily struggles. Daniel's lack of involvement in our home life made me question every facet of our relationship. I started to wonder if I had been mistaken for not defending myself sooner. My mind kept playing back moments from our early connection. Those times when I brushed off my concerns about what he was doing, believing that he will eventually change. However, I found myself entangled in a situation that seemed to be growing increasingly biased. The seething feeling beneath the surface was becoming harder to ignore. I finally realized that my reluctance to express my boundaries and demands was as much of a problem as Daniel's demeanor. I had spent so much time trying to keep the peace at the expense of my own happiness. I sat down to reflect on my life. I knew I had to make a choice. My marriage felt too out of balance for me to stay. In the weeks that followed, I took some time to gather my thoughts and consider my options. It was time to face reality and decide what I wanted to do with my life. I needed to find a way to restore my voice and take charge of my life. It was almost my 33rd birthday. I was under pressure to address these issues right now. I wanted to begin this new year with clarity and purpose, rather than putting my needs last. I had to take control and begin creating the life I truly desired. That might entail finding a way to improve my marriage or, if need be, dissolving it entirely. I felt a mix of excitement and fear as I considered what might occur next. I got the chance to reconsider my definition of happiness. I was going to continue somehow. Even though the road may appear daunting at the end, life was too short for me to settle for anything less than what I was due. I attempted to tolerate Daniel's domineering conduct even though I was growing weary of it because I didn't enjoy completing the tasks. What really annoyed me, though, was his insistence on giving his parents money. Daniel's family had a little farm, but they never seemed to be able to make ends meet. As they approached 70, they appeared to have never earned much money in their early years. Farming was becoming much more difficult for them. Daniel consequently got a lot of calls asking for money. First, as the months following our wedding went by, I realized that their struggles were understandable. I realized that the situation was becoming worse. 6 months from now, I was left to cover all of our living expenditures on my own after Daniel began handing his parents his whole earnings. It seemed so overwhelming that I finally spoke up. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. My wage isn't enough to cover everything." He looked at me as if I had just suggested something absurd. "Given that your family is experiencing difficulties, how can you say that mine is? Additionally, since you earn more money than I do, you ought to be able to make ends meet." I was taken aback by his answer. Every time I attempted to further explain my stance, he would not listen to me while he was speaking with his parents on the phone. He appeared to be trying to shield me from the reality of our financial predicament. "Don't worry about it. I'm paying for everything using my salary. I won't let her talk about it." He was not aware of it, but he would tell them that he was sending more than just a share of his salary. He was giving everything away. He soon started asking me for pocket money. "Can you give me about $200? I won't be able to even afford lunch." It seemed unbelievable to think that my husband was now relying on me to cover his basic expenses. While he was paying his parents his entire salary, I reached a breaking point and decided enough was enough. "Daniel, we need to set a monthly limit on how much we may provide your parents. You have to find a way to pay for your own meal." Daniel would go back and give his parents every dime of his money, even though he would always say, "God damn it, we'll do that." That was simply intolerable to me. One day I was forced to go out of town for a 2-week or so business trip. When I told Daniel, he acted like a child. "In 2 weeks? What will I eat? How about my clothes?" It was quite aggravating. Was he unaware that I had to travel frequently for work? I replied, "You must work things out on your own. You've matured. If you're unable to manage things while I'm away, why don't you just go back to your parents? You'd be fine there. Would you not?" Grudgingly, Daniel agreed. When I returned home 2 weeks later, I was surprised to find his sister Sharon in our home. She relocated a little farther away, and we hadn't seen each other since our wedding. As soon as I went in, she gave me a radiant smile. "Hi there. Emily, it's been a while. Oh, and the cash saved my life. Thank you very much." I was taken aback because I had no idea what she meant. "Money? What are you talking about?" Without hesitation, Sharon replied, "Daniel knew you had some money, so he agreed to provide me the startup capital for my business. He told me not to worry because it was at least $1 million. I stood in a state of astonishment, utterly confused. Right then, Daniel entered the room carrying my passbook and seal. As soon as he spotted me, he said that, "Well timed and welcome back. I'll give your savings to Sharon." What I stated. "Do you realize how hard my heart is beating?" Sharon? She is a nail artist, yes. She had always wanted to start her own business. Although she seems to have been saving her own money, she is around $1 million short. Remembering that you had exactly $1 million saved up from your single days, I urged her to come get it. It was incredible what I was hearing. He handed Sharon the passbook and sealed it, smiling as if he had just done something spectacular. "You're lucky that your dream will come true. Express thankfulness." Okay. Finally, I lost it. "What are you talking about?" "That's my money." My voice took on a tone of anger and disbelief. Daniel seemed taken aback but brushed it off. "You are going too far. It's just monetary. Your savings could help someone in need. Sharon has been working hard at her ambition, even if it's my money." "You didn't even discuss this with me." I was shaking my head, trying to figure out how he could think. "It was all right. Act quickly. Emily, you're not using it. It's just sitting there in the bank. This could change Sharon's life." His patronizing tone, he claimed, had transformed her life. How is my life going? "I have ideas with that money. Before you squander my savings, you have to ask me." Sharon was uneasy as she stood there, caught in the midst of our argument. I turned to her, feeling a mix of anger and frustration as she continued, "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Her voice was low. "It's not your fault. Sharon, I'm not upset with you. I'm upset that Daniel thought he could decide that for me." Daniel groaned as he ran a hand over his hair. "You're behaving illogically. Emily, I thought you'd want to provide for your family. This has nothing to do with helping our families. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? It's a matter of respect. You want to take my money too, even though you've been giving your parents your whole income. What follows? Will you make all the decisions without consulting me?" Daniel crossed his arms in a defensive manner. "My only goal is to support my family. How about me? We are necessary for them. I need you to be a partner in this marriage, not someone who embezzles my money and decides how much to spend without consulting me. This is not teamwork. Here you're acting selfishly." His face softened for a moment, but he quickly assumed a look of indifference. "When I give Sharon the money, we can resolve the issue. Later." My heart sank. "You're not capable of doing it. You cannot take away and ignore the fact that I am financially independent. You don't know what you're doing? Maybe I'm not understanding. But you're making it impossible for me to help my family," he responded. "Sometimes it's vital to make concessions." I snarled, "You're prioritizing the needs of your family over mine." "This is not sacrifice. It is manipulation." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see Sharon standing there, unsure of what to do. Her words were, "Perhaps we should all back off." I shook my head as my anger surged within me. "No, Sharon. Taking a step back is not the solution. It's about standing up for my rights and not letting Daniel dictate how I spend my own cash." Daniel rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed, and declared, "I'm tired of this fight. I'm giving Sharon money, and that's final." Tears stung at the edges of my eyelids. "You're going to regret this. I'm leaving you because of your intrusive behavior." I never agreed to this marriage. Daniel turned away from me, taking Sharon's passbook with him. A wave of despair washed over me. This was not just a disagreement. Our relationship appeared to undergo a radical shift as a result. I had to find a way to regain my voice and my independence before it was too late. I collapsed on the couch, my heart thumping with pain and confusion. This was becoming unmanageable. I used to see partnerships built on mutual respect and trust, but all of a sudden I felt like I was facing an adversary who didn't think I was on an equal footing. I took a big breath, knowing that I had to face this issue head on. I needed to find a way to regain control of this relationship, but the thought was overwhelming me. After weighing my alternatives, I made the decision that it was time to have a serious conversation with Daniel and inform him that we needed to both be involved in financial decisions because of our marriage. And that required treating each other with respect. "Why are you the only one making this choice?" I demanded, trying to speak steadily. "I mean, I might understand if you said you would lend it to her. She would need to provide us with a promissory note and a monthly reimbursement schedule, but she hasn't done any of those things." "What do you say?" I took the prior book and seal that Daniel had just given to Sharon, which made me extremely delighted because you're just going to throw away someone's savings. Incredibly, they raced. Daniel looked at me incredulously. "What do you say? Are we connected?" "Do we not? It's ridiculous to write promissory notes to relatives. And this isn't the only one. We're giving it to her. You don't even have a hobby because you're always working. It is wasteful to merely hoard money. Sharon has a dream. Isn't it more important to use it to fulfill that desire?" When he scowled at me, I realized how drastically different our values were. Annoyed. Wanted to turn aside and get out of the room. Even though I thought it would be pointless to continue the talk, Daniel continued. "This money is too beneficial for you, so I'm giving it to Sharon. There would be no use in it. To get your savings back, all you need to do is work." His words caused me to respond, and I grew angry. "Recognize this. Daniel, we'll get a divorce if you keep fighting over this." As soon as I uttered the words, I got a sudden realization. This was my opportunity to finally take control of my life. "All right, let's get a divorce. I'll write out the divorce papers and send them your way. I will be residing in a motel until the divorce is finalized, and I will come get my things soon. That's all." I packed my baggage from my recent business trip and left the house. Fast. Daniel stood there stunned by my sudden decision. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind as it processed what had just happened. Finally, he started texting me multiple times with things like, "You can still come back if you apologize now. Sharon also says that she will forgive you for what happened today if you pay her the money. So stop being stubborn and come back." I rolled my eyes and ignored all of his texts. And who did he think he was? The day after, I went to the municipal hall and mailed the divorce papers home. Nevertheless, Daniel kept texting me. "Do you really think this? I'll submit the divorce documents." I only responded with, "Please." Being free to ignore his other texts and send them quickly was liberating. The divorce proceeded more quickly than I had anticipated, and a week later I made arrangements for Daniel to stay at work while I moved my possessions to my new apartment. In one of his texts, he brought up the divorce paperwork. Daniel wrote it. "It brings me immense joy to be able to divorce a woman as ugly as you. We are strangers now. Please make sure to divide our belongings properly as we are divorced." His words were painful. I tried, nevertheless, to ignore his jests and focus on my own prospects. Even though I knew that all of the furniture and appliances had been purchased after we were married, I tried to be fair and left most of them behind. I also deposited into his bank account half of the small savings I had accumulated during our marriage. That night, Daniel contacted me multiple times. Here we go again, I thought, ignoring them at first, but Sharon soon started calling too. Finally, I picked up the phone. "Hi there," Daniel shouted from the other end. "What happened to the property division?" "This is ridiculous. There are only $800 in this account. I couldn't help but feel proud of myself. I calmly replied, "Take a look." Then I divided the property. We initially had $1,600 in our joint account. That's right. I handed you $800, or half of it. Since the furnishings and appliances were purchased after we were married, I left them all behind. Isn't that a fair division? Daniel's disbelief was obvious. What are you talking about? I should receive half of the $500,000 since you should have saved $1 million. And when your grandfather passed away, he gave you an inheritance that should be part of mine as well. I was startled and had to laugh since he sounded so absurd. This is what I expected. Otherwise, I doubt he would have agreed to a divorce so soon. Suppressing my laughter, I explained. Listen carefully. Daniel, the division of property reverses the allocation of marital assets. Mine. My funds go back to the time I was single, and my inheritance is not considered marital property. I'm not sure how you found out about property division, but after consulting a lawyer, I distributed our marital assets in a correct manner. All of the money we saved after getting married was earned by myself. You never contributed to our home expenses. Remember to be. You're lying, and I'm relieved that I even mentioned Daniel's anger. There is no way that could be true. If you don't provide it to me appropriately, I'll sue you. I heard the desperation in his voice. He was panicking quietly. I replied, "Go ahead. If you want to, go ahead and sue me. I haven't told you any lies. I also fairly split the property." In the momentary silence that followed, I could hear Daniel straining to understand what I had said. "You're making a serious mistake." Finally, his voice was low and menacing. I responded, "Perhaps I am feeling fear and determination coexisted, but I won't let you control my life. You can't tell me how to spend my future money." I hung up the phone. I experienced a sense of relief. I had finally stood up for myself, regardless of what Daniel said or did. I had decided to move forward. I had to regain my independence and focus on building a life that truly belonged to me. I had been stuck and frustrated for 2 long years, and I was ready to embrace the freedom that comes with making my own decisions. I took a big breath and felt empowered. I recognized for the first time in a long time that challenges lay ahead. Nothing seemed to be stopping me from beginning anew. "I'm not afraid of getting sued," I replied. My tone was unwavering and forceful. After being aware of this, Daniel, flustered, said, "So let's forget about the divorce." I was wrong. "Come back to me." He seems to have completely given up on trying to put things right. "What are you discussing?" I believed that I had finally made a decision. I returned fire. "The divorce has already been formalized, and I have no plans to return. This is a severe matter." I believed the message would be obvious due to the finality of my tone. Because this was the end, I felt obliged to clarify a few things. If you wish to remain there, you are in charge of paying the rent. The rent is about $1,800 per month. You probably didn't know that because you haven't paid for it. Daniel's voice became quiet as he processed what I had said. "Then you'll just have to leave," he stammered. "There's no way I can afford that." I replied, "My patients are dressed in flimsy attire. That is no longer important to me." After our conversation, it seemed that Daniel had returned to his parents' home since he couldn't afford the rent. I had no sympathy for him. His choices were already determined. I saw him sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage of our life together, trying to figure out what to do next. Not having enough cash to cover moving expenses. Daniel ultimately sold the furniture and appliances I had left behind. I couldn't help but feel both pity and satisfaction as I imagined his parents welcoming him back and expecting he would provide their house some financial relief. In reality, however, they probably were comforted by the illusion that he was making a decent living. Rosie's life was very different from Daniel's. He couldn't offer them as much money as he could when we were together, so I could tell he didn't feel comfortable staying there. I had made sacrifices for our marriage, so it was obvious that he wasn't prepared for the consequences of losing me. Meanwhile, Sharon had started preparing to launch her own business after Daniel reassured her that money was not an issue. However, my savings were out of reach, so her business plans quickly came to a halt. I could only imagine her frustration at having to cancel all she had started in preparation. I wasn't heartless, even though I knew I couldn't take the consequences of their decisions any longer. I was informed by Sharon that Daniel was struggling. She seemed frustrated with him, probably because he had not fulfilled his promise to assist. But to tell the truth, it was no longer my problem. My focus was on living, working, and relishing my newfound freedom. Being alone brought me a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. I enjoyed the quiet moments when I was not constrained by Daniel's expectations or demands and could make my own choices. The seclusion allowed me to refocus on my work and rediscover my passions, which had been ignored during my marriage. As time went on, Daniel kept messaging me to say that he wanted to make amends. The texts reminded me of the life I had left behind, but I completely ignored them. I found it amusing that he would sometimes confide in me about his situation, as if he were a kid vying for my favor. I disregarded their cautions, but I began to realize that I needed to speak up more firmly. I had, in fact, moved on. As I thought about my future, I realized more and more that I didn't want to ever again be engaged in Daniel's life. He faced challenges, and I had my own path. I couldn't handle the turmoil that came with marriage. In the end, I decided to block him. If there was still any link between us, I wanted to break it. I realized that in order to really embrace my independence, I had to take that step. The freedom to live my life as I saw fit was exciting, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially Daniel, ruin it. With that in mind, I took a big breath and prepared to break clean. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, one where I could finally focus on what I valued most: my happiness, my work, and my future.